let's get started then. Welcome. Thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate you being here. I know it's late in the afternoon, and late in the afternoon tends to be kind of sleepy zone, at least for me. And so I see that some folks brought sodas. That's good. Hopefully we've got some Red Bulls hidden underneath the desks or something like that. I don't have any free parting gifts of Red Bull, although I probably should have brought some. But I appreciate you being here. Today we are here to talk a little bit about communication strategies and how to keep the crazy at bay. This is designed to be part me teaching you guys and part you teaching me. And so I really want to learn more about the stuff that you're dealing with as well. And so the second part of our time, we're going to kind of work together a little bit to hear about maybe some of the issues that you guys are facing. And then as a group, we'll work together to see what we can come up with. No magic wands or promises, but we will give it a college try. Does that sound like a good plan? Oh, and then bonus, at the end of our session, I actually have a couple of books that I'm going to give away as prizes for those of you who are still awake. So does that sound good? Okay, cool. So before we get too far in, I thought it might help for you guys to learn a little bit more about me, and then I would love to learn a little bit from you. My name is Nicole Baldwin. We're located outside of Chicagoland, like 60 miles west of Chicagoland. Friends of mine that live in Chicago are like, dude, you can't actually say Chicagoland, because you should say like Iowa land, because it's a lot closer to Iowa than it is to Chicago, but most people don't know. Yes, see, represent. So if I say Sycamorian land, nobody knows where Sycamore is, nor do they care. So we're in Chicagoland. Sycamore is right there on the very, very edge of the map. In addition to working with AspireOne, part of my background, I was on staff over at Willow Creek Community Church leading communications there, and then also headed to VeggieTales. They're kind of get the whole Larry and the silly songs over at Big Idea Productions, kind of managing the brand development and advertising of that. But the cool thing is now over at Aspire, we get to work with ministries of all different shapes and sizes to help them tell their stories more effectively. And so that's kind of the fun thing for us, because we love to help those that are doing cool things do that better. And so that's a little bit about me. I would love to learn a little bit about you guys. How many of you are on staff or are key volunteer with a church? Show of hands, okay. How about a parachurch or some other type of ministry organization? Okay, is there an other category that I didn't cover? Other, what do you guys do? Where are you at?
With a Christian PR firm.
Okay, so yeah, you're right, that's not really parachurch, not really, okay, cool. And how about you? Same thing. Okay, so together. All right, that makes sense. Okay, and then how many of you are in positions of senior leadership, like senior pastor, executive director, I'm the guy in charge? Okay, and how many of you are either in charge of or do most of the heavy lifting for communications, marketing, donor development, something along that? Everybody, yes. Okay, cool. All right, well, we're going to kick things off with learning a little bit more about this idea of information overload, which sounds crazy, but is actually a real phenomenon that was originally coined in the 1960s. The definition of it refers to the difficulty a person can have understanding an issue and making decisions that can be caused by the presence of too much information. It's this concept that we're being bombarded with so much right now that we become almost paralyzed, and it's influencing our ability to even make simple decisions. Ted Koppel did a short documentary back in 2006 warning about this, and so I have a couple of snippets I wanted to share with you I thought might be interesting, kind of make sure we're all on the same playing field of how this works.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
As he so often does,
we record everything. Everything. The impact of that becomes totally numbing. I mean, future generations are going to be looking at literally billions of pictures and reams of videotape and film, and I'm not sure that they'll be able to make any sense out of it, because we don't discriminate between what is important and what is mundane. On the other hand, we are creating so much information on videotape, on film, on discs, cassettes, paper, that it becomes a matter of being able to perceive what is important and what is not. In this age of technological revolution and explosion, we are inundated by so much information that perhaps the greatest need we have is for a body of people who will sort of sift from that information, will sort of winnow it down so that we have something in a form of order that we can pass on to generations yet to come. Someone has to select. The editing process is more important today than it has ever been in the history of the world.
And that was 6 years ago. That was before all the social media craziness and Twitter and Facebook insanity and Pinterest and everything else that we have going on. Here's another one with some more updated stats from more recently. She's going to start walking. Okay.
It's called information overload, a theory that has recently been developed to address the intake of too much data due to the widespread use of digital devices, massive amounts of new information, and the ability to transmit this information so quickly. What's truly fascinating is that Americans spend half of their year consuming information. That's 182.5 days of straight data consummation. If I break it down, the average person consumes information for 12 hours a day, taking in 100,000 words a day, which is 201 letter-sized pages of text, single-spaced. The scariest part is that when only read, we remember 10% of this information. The stats on the internet seem decent, with the average person spending 32 hours online a month. During the same time, 30 billion new pieces of content are published on Facebook. That's 3 with 10 zeros. In terms of emails, the average professional receives at least 100 emails a day. No wonder why Yahoo's survey found that 1/3 of people would rather clean their toilets than sort through their inboxes. What's more interesting is that the average professional checks their inboxes 30 to 40 times an hour. The 21st century is clearly redefining multitasking. In a college lecture, students open twice as many distracted windows on their laptops as productive windows. For every 100 productive windows, students also opened 27 email windows, 33 surfing and entertainment windows, 43 instant messaging windows, 87 operation system windows, and 19 miscellaneous windows. The question is, does multitasking work? Research states that 1 in every 40 people are able to multitask without performing works at active tasks, which means a mere 2.5% of people are what they coined supertaskers. So what does this mean for the rest of us? Our brain can process 100 trillion instructions per second, while our working memory can hold between 3 to 4 tasks at a time. Multitasking has been a large contributor to information overload, which in turn has been a large contributor to our country's deficit. It's estimated to have cost the U.S. economy $900 billion annually since 2008. $900 billion a year. I could go to space with Virgin Galactic 4,500,000 times with that money. So what does this all mean? Well, for starters, it means we've become digital junkies. But the real question is, how do we fix this?
How do we fix this? I mean, if you think about it, if it's costing our country that much money, imagine what it could be costing our ministries. Lost donor dollars, lost opportunities, not to mention productivity, because we're trying to do too much. We're trying to process too much at the same time. And what's sad, what's the hardest part, is that we've got the coolest story on the planet, which is so much cooler than trying to increase the market share of laundry detergent by another 2% next quarter. But oftentimes, our message is just one of many things that's competing with everything else. People are insanely busy, and our story might be getting lost in the noise. What complicates this is many of our ministries are made up of a bunch of different ministry teams that are structured less like corporations and instead more like universities, where team leaders don't really report to communications, and communications doesn't really report to these different team members or leaders. And then these ministry team leaders are usually very passionate about what they do. And so they get focused, and then they start communicating independently, which can lead to silos or different voices and styles of communication. And so, then we start to sound a little bit like Sybil, where we've got all these different personalities and styles of communicating, different ways of communicating, oftentimes to the same people. And so before we know it, our audience gets overwhelmed, and we're struggling to manage it all, figuring out, how are we going to keep up with this stuff? And we feel the pressure to kind of be on top of the latest and greatest social this or that, without really having the time to step back and really ask ourselves, just because we can, doesn't mean we should. No. And the truth is that communications have changed. Traditional marketing efforts aren't as effective as they once were. In the past, it was very one-sided. It was like an idea of, here is information I want you to have, whether it was in the form of a brochure or a mailer or a website or whatever. It was about the message, and we were consumers. It was very one way. We took in the messages that were communicated to us. We didn't get to talk back. But now the medium is the message. And it's a two-way conversation that's happening in a variety of different channels, which means communications can no longer be viewed as a drive-through service that's designed to support the needs of our ministries. We need to be more strategic. We need to be looking at it from the big picture, because pressing send no longer means that we've communicated. And as the great Charles Kettering said, the greatest challenge with communication is the illusion that it's occurred. It's like we think we've said something, and have they? No. Oftentimes it has to do with their own worldview or their own perspectives or their own baggage, and so we think that they understand, but they don't. So we tend to head to the other end of the spectrum, and we start over-communicating. We start repeating the same message over and over again through every channel that we can think of. It's like, well, if they didn't get it the first time, let's try it through this way, let's try it through this way, let's try it through this way, let's try it through this way. But the problem is if everything is speaking the same volume at the same time, nothing is heard. We need to be curators of content, like Ted Koppel was saying, deciding what will be heard when. Here's Waldo, by the way, in case you were wondering where he was. So today, we're going to take a moment to kind of step back and get above the muck, above all of the daily activities that tend to consume us, and think a little bit about, where do we see our ministries heading? Who is it that we're serving, and what is it that we naturally do well? Drew, in the last session, started to talk a little bit about this. These really are the building blocks of developing a communication strategy. And then the channels or the tools that you use become a lot easier to see which ones or how that would work and how they kind of fit together. Because, if we don't know where we're going, how will we know if we've arrived, right? Or as the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland said, it's like, well, if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't really matter what road you take, right? You get there. It starts with vision. Now the key here is that we're not reinventing mission and vision, but we're thinking about, how do we best communicate our mission and vision? Why is it that we are here as an organization? What void would be left behind if we were gone? Would our community miss us? Would anyone miss us? Would they care? Everything that you do as an organization needs to anchor back or support your one big thing. Like, what's our one big thing, our focus, why we exist? And this can be especially challenging when you have visionary or entrepreneurial leaders that like to experiment with a lot of different things. You start to get into a flavor of the month mentality a little bit. It's like, oh, this is the new thing we're doing now, and here's that other new thing that we're doing now. People start to get exhausted because they can't keep up with the constant changing of what it is that we're doing, especially if it's not linking back to one core concept. The second question is really the who. Who is it that we're serving? What are their needs? How are their needs changing? What perceptions do they have of our organization? Like I was saying before, with perceptions and kind of their worldview or maybe their own baggage could influence how they perceive and receive your message. A lot of times the organizations that we work with are like, well, we serve everybody. You know, it's like, yes, but no. What do they have in common? There's a reason why folks are connected with your ministry versus anything else that they could be doing with their time, talent, or treasures. What is it? That'll make it a lot easier to start understanding what's the best way to communicate. The more focused that you are, the more effective you're going to be with designing your strategy and connecting with people in a way that makes sense. That doesn't mean you ignore people that don't fit a nice little package with a bow on it, but really making sure that you're truly speaking the language of those that are passionate about what it is that you do. The final question has to do with really what is it that we're good at. We want to build upon our strengths to make sure that we're not pretending to be something that we're not. In other words, you know, just because everyone else is blogging, if you're a terrible writer, it doesn't mean that you have to start a blog. And there's a lot of organizations that do. It's like, oh gosh, every senior pastor has a blog, so I guess my senior pastor should have a blog. But if he's terrible at writing and hates writing, no, no, don't do that. Find another channel, find another way to kind of connect. Have you guys heard of, you guys have heard of Seth Godin, right? Like, I don't know if there's many people, unless they live in caves, you know, that haven't heard of Seth Godin. He's not on Facebook or Twitter. He said they're just not his thing. So those presences are managed by his organization, and everything just keeps linking back to his blog. That's his one big thing. It's like the blog, you know, and how do we spread ideas? That's Seth's big thing. And so know what works for your organization. And so these kind of core blueprints will help to kind of influence your other communication channels. Because the human brain is only able to truly focus on one thing at a time. Magicians have always understood this, which is why, you know, they distract you when they're doing the illusions. It's like they get you to pay attention here while they're doing something over here, and you're like, oh wow, how'd that happen? Because you can't focus on two things at once. But yet when we're communicating, we're asking people to focus on multiple things at multiple times. And so here's a quick example to kind of demonstrate this idea of focus and how that works. That's kind of fun. Some of you guys may have seen this or not. Can you see?
How many passes does the team in white make? The answer is 13.
Can we get it right?
But did you see the moonwalking bear?
I think they'll highlight it because I know the video is kind of dark. So there he is, right there, moonwalking bear. There he goes. So the whole idea is that if we're telling people to focus on something, that's what they're going to see. If we're asking people to focus on multiple things, it's difficult to try to do that. And so when we give them too much information, the choices actually become exhausting. There's a whole concept of choice fatigue, and people end up not choosing anything. You guys have seen like Cheesecake Factory menus where you have like section 4, article 2, you know, chapter 8 to try to get to the appetizers. It's like, oh my gosh, can I just please get cheesecake? Where is that in the menu? You know, I know it's there, it's on the name, but you know, so that's that sort of a concept, and so people tend to get overwhelmed. And so as ministries, when we're listing a half a dozen things, you know, from the platform, or if we're listing endless opportunities in the bulletin, you know, it starts to convert into white noise, and people kind of tune out. Does that make sense? So the first thing that we really need to do is to kind of step back and determine, well, what is our one big thing that we're trying to say as an organization? It's connecting with senior leadership, or if you are in senior leadership, connecting with your folks in communications. Communications is just another channel for delivering the vision of where you're going and how are you going to get there. And so thinking about what is it that we're trying to say? How is this reinforced through other second tier or other channels that we may be communicating? A couple quick examples to help you guys see how this could work. Toms. You guys are familiar with Toms. Everybody's familiar with Toms. Now, of course, they make those cool, stylish canvas shoes that we got, but it's really not about the shoes, right? I mean, it's about the whole one-for-one idea. And every time you buy a pair of shoes, another is given to a child in need. So even like on their website, they're reinforcing this again, that it extends also beyond just shoes. Like they are now getting into eyewear, same concept, one for one. So that's their one big thing, is that every time you are doing something you're being socially responsible by making your shoe choice with us or making your eyewear choice with us, because we're able to then benefit a child that's in need. Another one that I know you guys have heard of is World Vision. Now, World Vision is involved with a lot of different things: child sponsorships, disaster relief, community transformation, to name just a few of what they do. But they all roll it up under one common purpose, which is building a better world for children. Everything links back to building a better world for children. People who have a passion for helping children tend to connect with World Vision. That's one of the common denominators that they have. They've done a great job of kind of connecting that common denominator behind all of their activities as well, and then communicating it in a way that really matters to their audience. This translates into their Twitter page too. These are just a couple of snapshots that I took over the last day or so of some of the content that they are curating through Twitter. Now, when you think of Twitter, it's like, well, isn't that just another channel to say the same thing that we're saying on our website? No. Not necessarily. Different people, different things. These Twitter posts are all reinforcing the idea of building a better world for children. Basically, it's like every fourth tweet. And I don't know if you guys can actually read these from where you are, but like one is talking about a mother's sacrifice, carrying your sick baby 20 kilometers to see a doctor on an empty stomach. It's talking about how they're wanting to make a better world for children. Another is 37.6% of girls are married off before the age of 15. Again, how can we make a better world for children? Another is talking about art from children on International Children's Day. Another is a MOPS visit to Armenia. So it's like they have other content that's kind of woven in there, but it keeps linking back to their same common one big thing. There's no question about what they're all about. Oftentimes organizations think that they have to say everything to everyone all the time. And that's just craziness. You can't. And so the key is to determine what is your unique niche and then focus on that. Second thing is to really dive in and define your audience. How is it that they communicate? Is it the same as it was before? Have we bothered to ask to find out what are we doing? Just because something was working before doesn't necessarily mean that it's still working. We recently worked with a global ministry that believed that they were phenomenal at fundraising and communicating with donors. But their donations had been flat for the last couple years and were starting to decline. And so we dropped just one simple index card in with one of their direct mail campaigns that they did that just asked, how can we communicate with you better? That's all that it was. It wasn't like, are we doing a good job? Are we not? Just, how can we communicate with you better? Overwhelming was the response from all these people. It says, stop sending us mailings. Some of them were like, we are on fixed incomes. We've got our donations already set up. Every time you send us mailings is annoying. There were people that were questioning the wisdom of leadership for wasting so much money on repetitive mailings to people that were already, in their minds, bought in to the vision. They went on and on and on. Some of them were downright nasty, and I was like, kind of, how do we edit this to represent it in a way that folks aren't going to totally freak out? But the main message was, what you're doing now isn't necessarily working, so you need to tailor your communications. Folks that are, a lot of their audience were seniors that were receiving these in the mail. Those were the fixed income folks. Obviously, a Twitter campaign isn't going to work for them. They're not going to be on Facebook. So thinking about how are they communicating today, where are they already living, and then how can we go to them? How can we frame our story, you know, what we have to say within what they are already doing? How can we go to them versus having them kind of come to us? Another last thing is knowing what it is that we're good at and what we're not. If we try to be all things to all people, we end up not really meaning anything to anyone, right? And so Drew kind of talked a little bit about this Skymall Syndrome, which I thought was awesome, this like shiny new thing that people try to tend to imitate other ministries that they see. It's like, oh, they're doing this is so cool, or oh, they're doing that. And I'm all for, like, if you see an idea, like, how can we jump on that and modify it? But the key is to make it your own. Because when inspiration stops short and becomes imitation, it robs the church or your ministry and the community that you serve from the unique call that God has for you. I mean, it's that whole concept of, you know, one body, multiple parts. We don't all have to try to do the same thing or be the head or be the foot. You know, some of us are the toe. That's okay. You know, there's a need for that. So really kind of understanding why are we here and how do we lean into that. And that does take hard work. Drew was talking about that planning stage. That is really critical. Because when you think of building a communication strategy, it's kind of like building a house. You need that blueprint stage to be able to make it work. Because a lot of times we'll jump right into execution, like, oh my gosh, there's people on Facebook, we got to do that. Or oh my gosh, there's a Twitter, we got to probably do that. Or how should we redo our website so that we've got an online community? That isn't necessarily the way to go, because that's like hiring an interior decorator to come build your house. You know, you're jumping into the tactics without really stepping back and asking, why? You know, should we do this? Is this the right choice for us? So then we think about, like, well, how does it all fit together? Once we know where we're going, who we're serving, what we do well, what are the different ways that we're communicating and how can they be aligned? How can we start to unify our efforts so that we have a better glimpse of the big picture? And that's a challenge because, you know, if there isn't a system that's in place for prioritizing your communications, it can be really hard, especially if you're trying to push it internally up. If suddenly the communications team is saying, well, now we are not going to be announcing things from the bulletin, or, I mean, from the platform, or, you know what, your content that you want to put on the website, not going there, not going to do it. You know, if there's not a system in place, you're going to make a lot of enemies really fast. 'Cause it's like, oh my gosh, you know, why won't Sharon put my content on the homepage of the website? She's just mean. You know, that's terrible. Sharon's saying, well, because your content only applies to this many people, and it really doesn't make sense for it to be on the homepage of our website. So the way that that works is to develop a system and have it rolled out by senior leadership to say, okay, these are the tools that we have, these are the people that we're reaching, this is the content that makes sense, yours goes here. You are, quite honestly, a C-level ministry. Not that we don't love you and that we, you know, matter, or that you matter to us, but your reach is a much smaller percentage of the types of people we're trying to connect with. So therefore, you don't get homepage real estate. It's silly. You know, it doesn't make sense. If you try to push it internally up, it's going to be a lot harder than coming from senior leadership down, saying, as an organization, we're going to be a lot more focused and a lot more streamlined in how we communicate. So therefore, this is what we're doing moving forward. This is the system that we have. It's no longer Michael's fault because he said no. Does that make sense? Sound right to you guys? And so, you know, the key, because if we don't really define what's important, then by default, nothing is important. That's the problem that, at least that we see with ministries, when they have all these different things that they're trying to communicate at the same level, at the same time. You have to go through the discipline, like our friend Koppel was saying, and curate content and say, this is the thing that is going to be okay to put. This is not what we're going to put. This is why. That's really the important part. So, you know, the key really is to simplify and focus our efforts. So I don't want to pretend that there's any cookie cutter solutions or kind of a one size fits all approach. Like, okay, here are the next 3 easy steps, so then all of your communications are going to magically just be better, because that's just not true. This kind of stuff is a little bit more sophisticated and it requires some thinking. And so what I would like to do is to kind of turn it over and have you guys take the floor. And so if we talk a little bit about maybe what are some of the issues that you're struggling with in your organization. And then as a group, we'll kind of see if maybe someone else has already worked with it or has found a solution, or if we say, wow, that's crazy and no one's ever done that and good luck. You know, I'm kidding. But like, what can we do to try to help you guys? So who wants to go first? Things that maybe you're wondering with or wondering about and wrestling with and are saying, gosh, it would be so cool if someone could give me, I could bounce this off of someone or I can get some insights. Yes?
Going off of what you said about developing a system and having senior leadership roll that out. In my organization, senior leadership is one of the biggest offenders.
Okay.
Especially homepage real estate.
Yes.
So constantly there's, oh, we got to get the president's message up on the homepage. We got to get this out, this out, this out. And a lot of it doesn't make sense. So how, being a lower level employee, can I communicate that?
That's a great question. So for those of you guys who may not have heard it, the question was, how do we create a communication system that's supposed to be rolled out by senior leadership when senior leadership is actually the biggest offender? They're the ones that are causing a lot of the challenges and problems that we have. And so that's a great question. Education is a great way to start. I wish I could say that it's just a simple thing, but starting with education, and it's going to be a slow process. And I think that as communicators, that's the biggest challenge, is when you can see how it could be, and then you see how it is today, and having that tension of going, ugh, please no. You know, you just want to poke your own eyes out with pencils. I hear you. And so it's a slow process. A friend of mine was hired to design the website for her church, and they had a communications director for the first time ever. She spent 2 years before they built a website, leading up, educating the ministries, educating senior leadership about why is this important, how are we going to do this, so they didn't just jump into a quick fix solution. And that was the tension. And she would tell me, she's like, you know, other ministry team leaders would be like, weren't you hired to design a website? Like, what have you been doing for the last 2 years? That's the tension, is connecting with them, sending them articles, sending them things, showing them like maybe mini mock-ups of what it could be like. You know, are there other ways that content that they're wanting to put on the homepage could be channeled in different areas? So that's another big thing with ministries, is if you can find the yes behind the no, that's hugely helpful. Another way that kind of a magic trick that I've seen to work really, really well when you're wanting to institute these types of changes is, let's try this for a little bit. Let's try not having 9,000 pieces of information on our website for the next 60 days. And let's track to see the level of engagement that we have. Let's try it. It's hard for people to say, no, we're not going to try it. It is easy for them to say, what? You mean I can never put this on here ever again? That's a lot harder to swallow than let's try this. Other questions? Did that help?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Talking about alignment, you have a large organization, large church, and you work at Willow. You have lots of personalities who have their own identities.
Right.
Their own Twitter accounts, their own blogs, their own Facebook pages. What do you do with that? I mean, do you just leave that alone? Should there be a strategy behind that?
Mm-hmm.
What's kind of a best practice in reference to that?
Okay, so the question is, when you have a complex organization that is all independently leading their communication channels, primarily through social media, like if they've got Twitter's accounts or blogs or Facebooks or whatever it is, you know, do we control that? Do we let them just run free? Is there something in between? I'm interested in kind of what you guys have to say. But maybe one thing quick is that I've seen to work well is if they're speaking on behalf of the corporate organization, it helps for it to be a little bit more centralized. If it's an independent like it's just they are on staff at this organization and these are their own views, then it's okay to be a little more decentralized. As long as there's a main corporate voice for the organization and there's some consistency between those channels. So like a corporate Twitter, corporate Facebook, corporate Pinterest, that all has a consistency in tone, style, and communications. Then if your student ministry leader is wanting to connect with his band of students in more of an informal way, that's okay. You know, you don't need to put the hammer down on that. Have you guys seen, and has anyone else kind of run into that same scenario or had different experiences where you're dealing with like a variety of different tentacles that are going out on their own?
Silos.
Silos, yeah, silos. Amy, what have you kind of seen?
Well, definitely. I mean, I think that our ministries are very separate, and one of the key things is having that head person. If that head person isn't in tune with social media and knows the importance of websites, education definitely is a key.
Mm-hmm.
But and their style is different. So it takes the creativity of approaching them, and maybe that right person too, that may not even be on your team, of approaching them. For example, ours just went to Estonia.
Mm-hmm.
When he came back, it was just kind of like this list of going through what he did, rather than the story behind it.
Right.
And I know the story's there, it's just that it's harder for him to probably pull it out on his own.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes maybe some other people that are even outside of your group that he can relate to and respect.
Mm-hmm.
And take that suggestion.
Mm-hmm. Be that sounding board and that kind of guiding beacon of light. Okay. Anyone else kind of run into things like that or have dealt with it in a different way? Other questions? This could make the record for the shortest talk ever. Okay.
Well, when I was explaining to you how like Ministry Com and people like yourself really inspired us, and we started our own communications team, and that made such a huge difference on bringing people together, the different ministries.
Mm-hmm.
We have 15 pastors, and for all of them to come from working on their own and come together and think about, okay, so we have all these kids coming in and doing, 600 kids coming in doing a sports league. How can we reach them in other ways and bring other ministries in and do it on one piece of paper and cover a lot of things? And without a communications team or some kind of a group, it is really difficult if you're just on your own to influence all these other pastors.
So having kind of a cross-functional team where you're banding together with maybe some other folks that get the ministry, or get the vision, I mean, and that are stakeholders. You know that in every organization there's always folks that if they're not on board, it doesn't matter what it is that we're going to do, it's going to just, do a nosedive and crash and burn and be terrible. So thinking about how can we build bridges and have them be part of that team, kind of bringing them up to speed with the vision of where are we going and how can this help support their ministry versus how is this going to help, or going to lock them down. It seems with any kind of structured communications, the first thing that leaders from different teams will do is they freak out a little bit. It's like, oh my gosh, what are you taking away from me? Or what are you keeping me from doing? And starting to build those bridges beforehand, saying, you're the leader of your ministry. That's what you're all passionate about, and this is where you should be focusing. You shouldn't have to worry about how do you get the word out to get folks to come to your event. That's our job, as the communicators. Let me help you with that. Some of them will do it in baby step ways, like, hey, before you send out your postcard to your people, why don't you run it by us and we'll do free proofreading. And so just kind of do the proofreading, and the benefit is they get to see what's coming in. I mean, it sounds sad, but that's a starting point. The more wins that you're able to build, the more credibility you're going to get when you're leading up. Yes,
How
Sharon.
about focusing also on the idea, they're so busy doing the work that they don't give you the raw materials to create something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, where do you go when they don't see spending the time or investing in the creation of these external assets.
So when they're treating the communications team more as the drive-through service, saying, hey, I need a brochure for this or a postcard for that, you know, go create it for me. And you're stopping to say, well, is a postcard the best thing to even use? One thing that I did when I started at Willow, it was very much like that. It was a drive-through service where they literally had an order form. It's like, what's the name of your ministry? Who is it you're trying to reach? What do you want? Brochure, postcard? I mean, it was kind of sad. And so then you're just left with this, oh. So what I started doing was proactively meeting with folks. I would look at the calendar. A lot of the stuff that they would have was annual. And so I would start being intentional about, hey, I see that you've got a huge retreat coming up 3 months from now, you know. Let's brainstorm about what's the best way that we can get more people here this year than last year. Oh, they were all for that. They're like, oh, help? Yes, I would love help. More people? Did you say more? Yes, I would love that. You know, so then we could get in front of it and start to be proactive and say, you know what, postcard might not make the most sense. Why don't we do this instead? You know, so again, baby steps, you know, kind of helped, but yes, you have to, and sometimes that can be difficult to get in front of it when you feel like you can barely get out from underneath it, you know, because Sunday tends to come with amazing regularity. It just keeps happening, you know, in the church world, at least. So starting to build some support systems so that you can go, or even just pick maybe a couple of your most influential ministries that you need to get in front of. And they tend to be your biggest advocates when you're able to help them. So picking a few to start is good. Other? Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that we've noticed in our department is if we can get, because we're trying to move from the drive-through mentality to the other mentality, and if we can get a hold of new staff right away before they've been indoctrinated by the old mentality,
yes,
it's super helpful. We have one of our departments with a new staff member right about this time, and we're like, we're going to come in when you start thinking about it.
Right.
When you start thinking about some new project or program, we want to talk to you. And so we have him trained really well, which has also helped us with credibility with other ministries because they see that ministry succeeding because he's willing to operate in that partnership.
Perfect example. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Yes?
What's your thoughts on, it's kind of a basic question, but it's a hot debate in my world right now, linking Twitter to Facebook or Facebook to Twitter?
It depends on the content and what it is that you're trying to accomplish. In my experience, they're two different audiences for the most part. I've seen churches use Facebook as more of a community where the congregation can be connecting with each other. The key is really to have someone there to cultivate that community, treat it like a community. And then Twitter, the content is very different. You know, that's more for quick updates or using it almost like texting. You know, some folks, there's a lot of churches that are using text messaging where they create these alert groups and they're sending quick updates about, hey, don't forget about this, or here's a quick weekend service. If you're not thinking of the audiences as having different needs, then I don't know that I would connect. I don't know, I would connect the two. Has anyone else kind of tried that or found success? How does it work for you?
Well, I was just curious your thought. Is there a difference on even what you're talking about an organization? So what, you know, does a church have a separate Twitter and Facebook versus a person?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. So does the senior pastor maybe have a personal account versus a corporate account? Honestly, I've seen it work well both ways. So if the church, some churches have strong personalities, leader-driven personalities. We all have seen those and know who they are. They tend to work well when the pastor, that's his account, you know, and he's tweeting. Others, if it's more of a team approach, it helps, or if the pastor just doesn't have time to mess with Twitter, or, you know, they'll have more of a corporate account. Facebook, usually for larger organizations, I have seen the senior leadership is not the one managing or curating that. They treat it almost like an online campus of sorts, where there's someone that's either overseeing communications or a volunteer or someone that is strategic enough with knowing how to respond to people and is available to be responding to people. So that's usually not senior leadership that's managing Facebook, at least from what I've seen. I'm sure it's been done in other ways successfully and unsuccessfully. Any other kind of like, what do you guys think? Have you seen things that have worked, or? You're leaving me here.
I do think it's a red flag to me when any organization shows up, or even a person, where I see they've linked Facebook and Twitter, and you see, you know, tons of hashtags and @ symbols on Facebook that don't actually correspond or link to anything, or things like that, where it shows either that you're being lazy about using the mediums, not appropriately using them, or it looks like you are, you know, ignorant as to the best practices.
That's a great point. Right, and so I would agree. If you're not able to do it well, don't do it until you're able to do it well. And not everyone agrees with that school of thought, but I've seen a lot of ministries build Facebook pages, say, all right, we built it, woo! And then they leave. You know, and then you know, congregations and new people are coming and they're asking questions. There's this one church we were working with where they had months of people that were asking questions like, hey, when are the Christmas Eve services? And, you know, is it going to be live? And just, you know, it was like Bueller, like there was no response at all. It was like ghost town. And someone's like, I was hoping to connect with the pastor. Is there anyone here? You know, and just no response at all. Same thing with Twitter. There was a church, another different church. It's so sad that we've like endless examples of things that are sometimes could be done better. Different church where their Twitter stream was actually retweeting another church constantly. It was like, oh, here's what they're doing. I'm like, what are you doing? I mean, it's not that it's bad to support other ministries, but I'm like, why are you? You don't have any of your own content. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't, you know, say, hey, church down the street's got an awesome serving thing for the community. It's not like you can't say that, but if they didn't have any of their own content, it was just like random, weird, bizarre. I'm like, is anyone managing this? Like, you know, that's the whole next door neighbor's best friend's dog's uncle, you know, that's kind of like, I do Twitter, you know, kind of a thing, and I don't know. Anyway, other things that you guys have seen or kind of wondering about? Your questions? Yes?
At my organization, I'm kind of a one-man band in that my responsibility is to generate content, but it's also to manage how our content is disseminated on, you know, a web strategy, a social media strategy, that kind of thing. I mean, my position was created in the fall, and our organization never like given any strategic thought to this. So being here the last couple of days has been wonderful, but at the same time I'm trying to decide how much of this can I do me, how much can I get help from my colleagues at my organization, but when should I also look at outsourcing, and just trying to prioritize and figure out how much I can actually realistically do, and when does it take an outside source to help out.
And when you mean outside source, would that be for creating content, managing content?
No, it wouldn't be for creating content. It would be things like improving the channels that we have, like our website. Just
I see.
Our website is aesthetically not the most appealing, but I'm starting to think about maybe it needs help with just how everything is designed, the information architecture itself.
Right.
Search engine optimization. I'm doing a little bit of that now, but nothing real big. So I would still be the one generating the content.
Great question. No, that makes sense. And what I've seen, churches that are kind of at that growth stage, there's several like natural built-in kind of growth stages for churches where, you know, kind of like in businesses where you have entrepreneurs that are bootstrapping it and they do everything, and then it gets to a point of, oh my gosh, I just can't do everything. It's not that they don't want to or they're not capable of it, it's just bandwidth. And so when you reach that level, what I've seen to work well is folks will hire us or a team like Drew's or someone else to build the site, and so that then they have control over it moving forward. And they will help to oversee and make sure that, you know, it's designed in a way that's reflective of that church. But to have someone do some of the heavy lifting with the tools is helpful. I know some organizations that outsource content creation too. That's why I was asking about that. I always feel a little sketchy about that with outsourcing social media. You know, having someone create your Twitter posts or create, I mean, I know there's people that do it well and ministries that do it well, both on the, like, I get paid to do this and I'm hiring someone to do this. It can work, but for me it feels a little off. But Yeah, so I would say with getting help, especially for things like search engine optimization, that's a whole nother world. You know, where just spending investing a little bit to get someone who truly knows what they're doing will probably just pay off in you know, bazillions, because rather than you investing the time to get up to speed, to learn it, to do all of the, it's like, you know, you start to value what else could you be doing with your time that only you could be doing. That's a good kind of filter for me sometimes. Like, what can I do that no one else can do? And then everything else we just kind of share the handout. Other ideas, questions, thoughts? Yes?
What do you look for in terms of the metrics of, like, say, Facebook or Twitter? I know Facebook has its own kind of, but in Twitter there's some stuff out there. What kind of things do you recommend, or what kind of numbers make the most sense? I know, like, there's the followers versus engagement, or you know, so what kind of things really stand out to you?
You know, I was at a marketing conference in Chicago about a month ago that was talking about this in addition to website metrics that I found fascinating. And you would have different metrics, obviously, for each channel. For Facebook, what seems to work well, or seems to be an appropriate measure, is more of the engagement. It's less about people just coming and visiting, but the whole point of that is engagement. So how are people connecting? You know, are they talking to each other? Are they asking questions? Are they posting? Are they connecting in some way? Twitter retweets is a great way. You know, are they asking questions? You know, so some of that you'll want to link back to your strategy of why are you even in those channels and what is it that we want to accomplish. That's a great way to kind of link back that way too. But with the website, what was kind of fun is they were saying stop looking at page views, stop looking at like hits, and look more at how are they engaging? Are they making transactions? How long are they staying? You know, which pages are they going to versus just the hits? Because if people are hitting and then bouncing, it's like that's not really, we're measuring the wrong things. That's not success. So part of it is kind of stepping back even a little bit further and saying, why are we in those channels? What are we hoping to accomplish? And then measuring that. But engagement for Facebook and same thing with Twitter with like how are they sharing the story? How are they spreading the word can be another kind of simple, quick one. Has anyone else kind of like seen other ways that they've been measuring success in those channels?
I don't know if anyone uses Buffer app, but it's a good way to measure Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
It has built-in analytics.
Oh, yes. That's a great example. Yes.
Tweet reach, if you're using a hashtag, is another useful.
Yep. And Bitly, I think also, if you're using the URL shortener Bitly, it already has built-in analytics for that as well. Makes sense. Okay. Other like things that you guys are kind of working with? Yeah, sure.
Can you talk more about Facebook engagement? I mean, what tips could you give to get better engagement from your community if they aren't? I mean, what things could be done to cultivate the information you put so that they will interact?
Well, creating content that matters is a great way, because if you're not putting content there that people care about, then they're not going to go there. And that's a little bit of what Drew was talking about in the last session, is really having good content helps to drive, plus the interaction also helps to drive more engagement too. So if people post a question and someone responds, and they respond rather quickly, that is telling your audience, we actually care about what you have to say, we're going to respond to you quickly, and we're going to give you the information that you're looking for. So that's a quick way to start to build more engagement. And then you had a second part to your question that I forgot.
It's more of a matter of like for a newer community, if they aren't talking at all, because
right.
you just started, how do you begin to curate that content so that they'll even bother to begin?
Well, what I've seen not work is when, and this is both in the marketplace as well as in ministries, when people just post random questions, like, what do you think about this? And then nobody answers. Like Bertolli pasta, or no, I'm sorry, Barilla pasta. Are you guys familiar with that pasta line? They have a Facebook page where they're saying, what's your favorite kind of, you know, spaghetti or something? It was like a poll. And nobody voted. Like, nobody. So then they waited a couple of days and then they posted it again. It's like, what's your favorite kind of spaghetti? And again, like nobody. So then they ended up voting themselves, you know, like it's like angel hair, you know, it's like, really? So trying to create a mock version of community tends to be not well received. I mean, you guys have all seen blog posts where folks will say, so what do you guys think? And there's like no comments at all, you know. So I think that having good content is a good place to start. I wouldn't worry so much about forcing that as much as curating it once it starts to happen. So think of like a plant that's growing. You know, you can't force it. You just keep watering it and give it some time. I don't know. Drew, what would your thoughts be?
I think you have to think about those who have liked you differently, and rather than think that they're actually seeing anything, know that they're not. If somebody likes you and within 7 days they don't interact with you, you disappear. And unless engagement reaches a certain level, so this is based on like edge rank and other things. So we talked about on the state of the digital ministry that you need to be awesome at least once, 4 times a month or once a week in order to get that re-engagement. Because once someone interacts with you again, you're more likely to show up in their stream again. So particularly for organizations, seeing that list of people as almost like a marketing list that you now have permission to use sponsored stories and other things to re-engage them, so that you get a critical mass to get back onto the walls and the threads of a lot of people that haven't seen you in a long time. So I think a lot of people you have to shift based on the edge rank.
Okay. And someone else had a question or something that they wanted to add? No? Okay, any other thoughts or things you guys were wondering about?
Do you have, Amy and I were talking in the break, do you have any like suggestions on building a social media calendar? Just some basic tips on how a ministry, big or small, might kind of start to approach the basics of that?
I would look at it like you would look at any editorial calendar. So thinking about what upcoming events, what upcoming stories, and then being intentional about it, and then which channels do those seem like they would be appropriate for. Has anyone like tried to do that here that can get a little more specific with or share ideas or suggest examples that they've used?
We've done.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
We've made crazy Excel spreadsheets that it ends up being like a giant mess when you look at it, but we'll take an event or a theme or a topic and then columns for every channel. Maybe some channels it's not applicable, but you change the tweet, change the message, change the link, and then even for some clients we'll do 6 months out in advance. We may not even have content to even write the post language or something, but we'll go ahead and start planning and posting it and filling it as we go. And even if we're not managing it ourselves, we're passing it off to someone else, we build the infrastructure that allows them to implement it themselves and get thinking about what the start of the outside the box type things, whether it's events like you mentioned or quotes or questions or polls or what have you, to mix it up and keep the thought process going.
Or even like linking to other like-minded stories or bringing other things that would be interesting to the people you're trying to connect with. So it sounds like what you're saying is the intentionality is really a big part of that. Let's kind of hold that. There we go. So it sounds like the intentionality is really kind of a core component. And did you have something you wanted to add to that?
We've got is both a process as well as people, so that you create the framework that you have to schedule on or whatever, but you still have to trust the people who are doing it. And you can see that we're still in a bunch of gaps, especially with the immediacy of they got to freedom to know this theme this month. You may not know a month out what we're going to be talking about specifically. So I'm going to be focused on this theme.
Which is a great way to kind of keep linking it back to that one big thing that we're trying to communicate for that period of time. Because just when you guys are thinking that you're going to, bang your head against the desk, if you need to hear that message one more time is right about when people are starting to get it for the first time. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Other things? No? Okay. Well, you've done a fantastic job. I know it's kind of late in the day, so thank you for your participation and interaction. If anyone wants to connect with me, here are a few ways that you can do that. But thank you guys so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.